Good evening, everyone. Professor York. I'm here to talk about new products, lean startup, and a few other innovation models. This is a lecture that several of the teams had requested for GSB 524. We have a number of topics that we will cover in today's journey. So let's get off and going, and starting with defining new products. Okay, our new products is, what is a new product and why is it important? A new product can be it could be a line extension. It could be an entirely new product. It could be a new business division. It could be new technology. And why do we do it is because innovation's key, because with established products that they go through a life cycle. And once they go through that life cycle, that to be able to sustain growth is driven by new products and innovations. And that's critical. And also is that you have competitive and changing marketplaces with new competitors and new entrants and alternatives. And so therefore, by having innovative products, you can continue to grow. A good example is Lipitor, $13 billion product, leader of the category, went generic, and Pfizer lost literally in 6 months 50% of that top line revenue. Think about the impact in terms of the market cap for Pfizer at that point in time. So this is one of the reasons why pharmaceutical companies do have robust pipelines and spend a lot of money in R&D, because half of the valuation of a pharmaceutical company up to that number is based on what's coming in the future, because realistically pharmaceuticals are limited by the patent life of a product, of which almost half of that time, believe it or not, is devoted to the time that you develop, doing what we call phase 1 through 3 research, and then getting regulatory review. So realistically, one of the biggest issues that we've done in the life science business that we've had to deal with in recent years has been what we call the patent cliff, where a number of major products have reached patent. They fall off the cliff, they have generic inclusion, and therefore it impacts the bottom line to many different organizations. So you need to fill that pipeline. You can do it through internal organic development, or you can do like Gilead did. It bought Kite, which had some very innovative technology, which is CAR-T technology platform for being able to use T cells that are then incubated with antigens from cancer cells that can be able to use to attack the certain tumor types, such as lymphoma cells or leukemia cells. A good example of not doing it right is with Novartis and Alcon, where Alcon did not invest in terms of what we call breakthrough innovation, and they had more sustaining innovation in terms of just formulation plays. And the thought leaders had already told us that there was going to be problems. The managed care payers did not see defined differences, and to the end, in 2015, we saw a flat year, and then 2016 was a flat year with new management, and in 2017, there's been discussions about spinoff of a company that originally was bought at $50 billion to maybe $25 to $35 billion, which is a nice little haircut there. So that's why innovation is so critical, to be able to propel long-term, not the short-term, but the long-term profitability of a company and growth. So why do new products fail? And so, the bottom line is that the odds are against new product success. Almost 3/4 of new products fail. And out of 100 exploratory projects, you may end up with one that actually does have success. And in the pharmaceutical business, those numbers are even worse. They fail because many times there's insignificant differences, or that the product development process doesn't have clear market or product definition before product development. We see this particularly in SDLC, or waterfall development, which I'll talk about later. Sometimes there's too little market attractiveness. You may have a market that is what we call contracting. I worked on a product that dealt with docetaxel, which was a oncology product that was actually declining at significant double-digit rates, but meanwhile I had a client who wanted to develop a alcohol-free docetaxel, thinking that they would be able to stem that share loss. There is also the poor execution of the marketing mix, poor product quality, and as we talked about, voice of customer, just not listening to the customer, insensitive to customer needs on critical factors, and understand the pains, the gains, the job to be done. And then there's bad timing, although the iPhone, when it's launched in the recession, sort of dispels that explanation. But reality is that if you are in a recessionary period, it could lead to a poor product launch, especially if you have a discretionary product or you have a high-ticket item product. And then no economic access to buyers, which really talks about the impact of the channel and payers. But the number one issue, startup mistake that occurs, is that people build things, they build their field of dreams that nobody wants. And that is so true with so many products. I see it in the wine business, I see it in the beer business, I see it in so many businesses. Somebody's got this great idea, and the reality is, guess what? It's your idea. Yes, it sounds like it's innovative to you, but if it isn't innovative to your customers, guess what? It ain't gonna fly. So, with that said, let's go to what's needed. First of all, what's needed is to understand what we call the 7 rules of innovation, which start from the top, which means you have to have strong leadership and belief around the importance of innovation. Merck in the 80s grew tremendously because they had a guy named Vagelos, who was a physician, came out of Washington University, who believed in R&D, and they developed unbelievable R&D capabilities to bring time, year after year, success after success, multi-hundred-million-dollar products. That attitude, in terms of from the leadership, has to infiltrate throughout the organization to integrate innovation throughout the business functions, and it has to align to the company's businesses. We also need to manage the tension between the creativity, which is from either the scientific creativity or the creativity we may see on the agency side, with the feasibility, which is the business side, which is we need to know, do we have the right market, right customer? Is it a large enough size market? Are we competitive enough? Is it crowded? Do we have the manufacturing capability? So go back to the Cleopatra case and the questions that I raised relative to should Cleopatra be going to market, which really is very critical. And then you have to look at neutralizing anti-innovation forces, which tend to be more of the short-term sales and marketing people looking at quarter-to-quarter performance rather than looking at long-term growth. And then creating networks both inside and outside, particularly outside with startups, also with academia, to be able to create new products and get them in a pipeline. And then last but not least is, if you do not measure, as it's been pointed out in a recent issue of Sloan's management review, and you do not reward innovation, it won't grow. So let's talk about a concept called open innovation, which ties into our reaching out voice of customer, which was in our interview lecture. But open innovation is a paradigm which assumes that firms can use external ideas as well as internal ideas, and that you can use both internal and external paths to the market to advance your technology. All right. In the old model that we have is, it's developed field of dreams. Here we are in the lab. I call it lab to market, which actually there's a business school that has a class like that, which I just sort of scratch my head about it, because that's the old market. The model is what P&G does, what Lean Startup does, which P&G does, Connect and Develop program, where P&G actively seeks ideas, processes, products from outside firms and individuals, turns them into P&G brands. And as you can see on the bottom, some great brands, particularly Swifter, which has been just unbelievably performing product. Remember, your customers are your innovators. So you need to talk to the customer. The idea here is let the customers design the products. They know what their needs are. And I talked about this in Voice of Customer and the jobs that they need to complete to better the companies. This is something very critical for teams 2 and 6 as you do your research, and even team 5 as you do your research in terms of Teresia. You guys need to understand the customer and what the job to be done is in your space. And even for team 4 with Slow Brew, you might even think about the job to be done by your customer archetype, by which beer. Okay? So how do you do that? Well, there's a variety of tools that you may provide. Here we have some electronic tools and let them design solutions. I've had some students actually develop minimum viable products using app applications that are there. I've started my Business 310 class, and I've done interviews by just using a blank page or using a wireframe of an iPhone. Some examples that could be considered in terms of customers being innovators include OpenSoft Software, BBA, which is a flavor enhancing firm that allows customers to make their own flavors in the new food development process. Something that maybe Slow Brew or some of the wineries around here could learn from. And then there's Twinner, which has the users as innovators in terms of how they use that. 140-word character statement. They've done a lot more. As we know, even our president has been able to move it in a whole new direction. So let's go into the next area, which is the new product development process, okay, which we have here. And a new product development strategy is a very, very important thing, which is to identify opportunities and threats to companies. You need to understand, as we talked about in situation analysis, is in our SWOT, or 5 Forces of Competitive, we need to understand what is going on in our marketplace today and think about how it's going to change in 3 to 5 years, because you may need that time to project out with development of certain types of products. Now, step 1 is what we call idea generation. And that may be both from outside the company as well as inside. So we bring in some open innovation as well as internal innovation. But the customer articulates the job to be done and desired outcomes. Okay? And then there are jobs and desired outcomes not articulated by customers that internally R&D departments and technology, social, political, legal changes outside the company may influence. These two factors and forces spur innovation by firms to address the desired outcomes. I like to think of it as the job to be done. Good example is what Nestle did with its hotlines, and bring just consumer hotlines in here. They were able to learn about some needs and be able to address issue, as you can see in the red, in terms of pointing out that the Nestle standard 8-ounce coffee mate jar was too small. And sometimes this was not picked up in the what we call go-to-market, you're doing your focus group work, and that the company needed to just change something into the standard jar and as a result of that response. In Hacking for Growth, okay, the book by Sean Ellis, they talk about the voice of the customer that's here. I've talked with and done market research with customers about what SKUs that you should have, where a company might say, oh, I think I only need 2 SKUs, but then the customer comes back and says, there's a third SKU that you've totally mixed, and it can make a difference between success and failure in terms of that product line being adopted. Step 2, screening and evaluation. The most new products do not pass this step, okay? And what's the examples here is to separate the ideas that have merit from what I call the fluff. So Frito-Lay, they spend a lot of time with their customers doing interview. They did this around chips, particularly a multigrain snack chip. They then experimented with 50 different shapes before settling on a thin rectangular chip that we know as Sun Chips. Actually, in the beer business, guess what? Formulation scientists and the brewers from Shock Top have been able to do that in terms of modifying their formulations to find out which formulations would make sense for the next product to come in the Shock Top line. P&G has 3 basic questions, and you may have getting similar insights from case 2 and those questions that I posed to you. Is there a real customer? Okay. And the real customer being that customer archetype. Okay. And also in terms of the channel archetype. And does the organization have the scientific and technology capability to develop the product? In Cleopatra, we were looking at, can we market this product? Does the organization have the capabilities of being able to market the product? And then is the potential for such a product large enough to offer a promise of growth? This is what we talk about in terms of market sizing, so critical, as well as the competitive mix. Because if you have a large market with a low competitive mix, you have an unmet need, this makes it very attractive. That's there. And then you look at your internal capabilities and look at the customer needs that are there. So I think P&G is sort of dialing into things, and I wouldn't argue it's been a very successful firm for so many years. Step 3 is business strategy. And this busy slide, so I'm going to break it up into left and right. On the left-hand side, we have product features, which is what we call TPP. Okay, so you pull across to the right-hand side, and you see the table there, and that's a TPP, which basically target product profile, which has minimum, best case, and base case, and an optimum case in terms of certain features that exist there. That is very important in terms of driving, in terms of a checklist of what you are looking for in terms of a product as you move through preclinical development into clinical development. And then there's what we call commercialization strategy, where in many ways this is what you do when you do a venture pitch, but you do it internally to management, making a business case. Is there a true market need? Who's the customer? What is the need? What's the fit to the company? Do you have product market fit? What's the competitive analysis? What's the financial analysis, which is very critical. And as you can see on the right-hand side, we have an NPV analysis, which is really the balance of future cash flows versus initial investment. And then in commercialization, there's the market development, which is called pre-market development, and ultimately the go-to-market plan, which is really the launch plan for the product. So you have to have an organization that can not only do market development, but also can execute in terms of getting in the market and being able to gain share. That means boots on the ground, means a very strong sales force and a tactical marketing group and a good agency working with them. And also having very good trade relationships. You need to load the channel. Step 4 is about development, which is product development, which starts with prototypes or even minimum viable products, and then pilot. And then scale up. Scale up means small batch and large batch. That's there. So you go through iterations that are there. It could be digital, as you see with Salesforce, or you could be in terms of just physical, as you see on the right-hand side. But then you go to testing, which can be done both with the consumer and in markets. With the consumer side, there's focus groups. And this is a measurement of consumer attitudes and perceptions. And these focus groups are given to description of the product, and their attitudes and perceptions are addressed. Sometimes we will do this in one-on-one. Sometimes we'll do this with advisory boards, which is a space that I work in as well, where we have thought leaders who are giving us feedback on a product that may be in early stage or pre-market launch, and we want to get a feedback on the TPP, the messages, the branding, even various aspects of packaging, etc., just to make sure that we are dialed in. And then ultimately test marketing, which you see this on the consumer side, where we select a geographic area. Phoenix is a very good example, and where you could be able to generalize it to the product's overall target market and have consumers evaluate and buy without knowing that they're participating in this. So do we have a good test run? If we have a good test run, say in Phoenix, then let's take it out maybe to the Southwest region and across the country. And sales and monitored, so a company can estimate the product's performance. A full-scale introduction allow for being able to build a base for forecasting basically your growth models. But unfortunately, there are limitations. You tip your hat to your competitors, which can lead to responses. You do have expenses to this, and you may have false positives and negatives in the marketplace. So then we get to what we call commercialization. Okay, and that's where we get to, and we're in full-scale production and sales. And in our go-to-market, we have launched the product, and it's the first 6 months that make all the difference in the world. If you do not launch properly, your product can die. So what you have to watch out during commercialization is about competitors introducing products that are similar and could confuse the customer and hurt sales. Number two, cannibalization of your own established products. And we saw this actually in the contact lens business with, I think you had worked on the pricing model for Daly's Total One. We were concerned about cannibalization of actually Daqua, which is Daly's Aqua Comfort Plus in terms of contact lens. So you need to always be aware of that, because your goal is not to steal your own share, but to steal other share. But I will put context that if you have a product that is at the end of its life cycle and you are going to be eroded because of generic incursion, e.g., like example would be Alphagan P, which came in to basically take share from Alphagan, which was going generic. We see this now with Kadcyla, which is basically trying to pull the share that would be lost with Herceptin. Then there's a strategy that is there, and you understand the cannibalization strategy that's there for an intent, because you want to keep those dollars versus having those dollars go somewhere else. So let's talk about some other models here. First and foremost is you'll hear about, if you're in engineering, you'll heard about waterfall or systems development lifecycle, or SDLC, which is progressing through a path of engineering, which is, defining the problem, characterizing solution, breaking down the solution subsystems, designing subsystem. It's all engineering driven. And then ultimately, as you move down the waterfall, ultimately you're getting testing, the implementation, and fixing bugs. And you're going, wait a second, where's the market involvement here? And that's where this model falls down. But for large scale, large projects, okay, you're building a tunnel underneath Los Angeles like Elon Musk is doing, or you're building a tunnel under Boston or New Bridge, or very, very large infrastructure type of things, or a government contract, maybe for, we'll say, fighter jet planes. Okay, this may be an appropriate model. Okay, and I remember having a big debate in our IT class years ago about the merits of waterfall versus that of agile, which is a much different animal, which can be characterized similar to a model that is used in the startup community that was popularized by Steve Blank and also Eric Rice, and this is Lean Startup. And so the newer models for evolving new companies and products are agile and they're lean. And really the take home is find the value in terms of nailing it. That means going into understanding and identifying the customer through customer discovery, and being able to understand the job to do with that customer, the pains and gains that are there, and then validation of, once we've developed a minimum viable product, to make sure we have product market fit. Once we've got that, then we can move over to business model execution. If we're not, we have to pivot and go back and make sure. And what we want to do in that first cycle is fail fast. Okay? So start up out of the gate, but as you become a bigger company, then you get into business model execution, which is really creation of customers and building the organization, which is about scaling, which is different skill sets. So tied to this whole process in terms of customer development is what we call a value proposition canvas, where we have identified the pains, the gains, and the job to be done with the product pieces, the gain creators, the pain relievers, and the products and services. We use this in Business 310. It's something that could be used, particularly I'm thinking in terms of some of the California Closet products as well, and maybe even the Crown Point Medical project as well. So we look at what are the customer issues and what value proposition will we bring to the table. Tied to that value proposition canvas is another canvas called the business model canvas. And this canvas has two sides. The right-hand side is about value creation. The left-hand side is about operations efficiency. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is, again, link those customers to the value proposition. So on the right-hand side, what we are doing, as we talked about previously in other cases, was do we have the right customer? Do we know what the job to be done? Do we have the customer relationships or get, keep, grow? Do we know what the channels are? And then can we monetize that by having the proper revenue stream, whether it be, per unit, whether it be a licensing, whether it be a two-sided model. And then on the other side, in terms of the operations, is do you have the key resources? And that can be people, platform, it can be intellectual property, it can be capital. And key activities such as sales, marketing, manufacturing, it could be various operations pieces that are there, accounting, etc., that are internal organization. And with marketing and sales, you usually have key metrics that are tied to those key activities that make your business model work. If you're in consulting, it may be problem-solving skills. And key partners are those who are your supply chain or partners to be able to help you, and it might be joint ventures, etc., be able to help you deliver that value. Since some of the things you might not necessarily want to do internally, sometimes you need to have capital support. Maybe you have to have political support. Maybe you have to have a JV intellectual collaboration to be able to move forward a certain platform in science, whether it be biomedical or in technology. And then you have the cost side, and that being in terms of your fixed and your variable costs. And at the end of the day, when you balance out the costs with the revenues that we see on the left and right sides, you want to make sure that you're running a positive number, because that's also the number one reason why a business goes out of business, which is about the inability to return a profit and a sustainable profit. And this process uses what we call build, measure, learn loop with a minimal viable product, as Eric Rice had popularized in his book, The Lean Startup. So a minimal viable product you may be wondering about is a pretty straightforward concept. It is a small solution that enables you to test your assumptions, and it's the small solution that delivers customer value. No, it's not what we call a sequential approach, as you can see in the figure on the right-hand side on the top, where we start slicing different pieces, or you can see in the lower hand figure as we build a cake, we'll start with different pieces ultimately to combine for a final cake. Alternatively, in MVP, what we're looking to do is go with the most minimal across that'll hit the most core features or benefits that we're trying to strive for. Example is the cupcake, rather that is the sample to the wedding cake. Or maybe you do the 5-gallon carboy, or even a smaller batch of a specific type of beer type to test with customers before you go into larger scale production. And linked to this is a new approach, and I know that Crown Point Medical is working on with Garrett Smith, who is a Stanford Biodesign Fellow and has already built the company and sold the company off this methodology. But realistically there is some similarity here in terms of needs finding and screening, which is identification of customers and situations and needs that we're looking at. Generally, that's done either via interviewing or embedding in a clinical practice for some time, to then generating a concept and screening the concept, and that can be generating hundreds of concepts and then prioritizing and rank ordering and then screening based on criteria to bring to maybe the top 3, top 5 that are there, and doing some testing, and then pivoting back in terms of making sure you're tying back to the needs of the customer. So in many ways, there's a lot of similarities to the lean startup process. And then ultimately, in terms of what I call the implementation piece, which is the development of the strategy, which go to market strategy, and the business planning processes that allow you to address regulatory issues, payer issues, and ultimately go to market issues from a sales and marketing standpoint. And then one of the last concepts to think about, not the last, but I think a concept that is very breakthrough is what we got to think beyond sustaining innovation. And most companies do what we call tack-ons. iPhone 6, 7, 8, Galaxy 6, 7, 8. Now we got, I think, iPhone Z, which just are tacking on. We see this in automobiles, etc. But we miss in terms of populations that are not being addressed. And I think teams 2 and 6 have a tremendous opportunity here. And in this, they can be able to go and move to that curve in the red that is shift to the right, which really looking for a more minimal solution and a more attractive price point, and looking at how you can disrupt. And as we see on the right hand side, here's several different technologies and companies that have been able to exploit that disruptive innovation model that Clayton Christensen from Harvard has espoused in several books and articles. And I think I have something on this this approach in your reading pack. And remember, disruptive innovation is something that at P&G has taken seriously. And one example is, actually they devote a part of their budget in their R&D to disruptive innovation. And what they've done is, one example is, as you can see in the medical instrumentation space, is being able to change the paradigm in terms of how we sterilize equipment, which is very important, especially as we move into, I'm going to say, developing nation markets, South America, Africa, Middle East, parts of the Middle East, I will say, Afghanistan, parts of Asia, etc. Again, I'm going to say parts because there's some parts that are tremendously wealthy. But developing the ability to eliminate several cleansing steps and then the use of one machine by being able to place the instruments on a table treated with chemicals. And so this can offer not just developing countries a more cost-effective solution, but also hospital clinics and doctors' office, as well as an operational efficiency and even inventory savings as well. And then I think one of the other things that we need to think about innovation is not just about technology. So this is great 2x2 that comes from an article by Gary Pisano from Harvard. And in this 2x2, I think what outlines on the bottom side, you see you can leverage an existing business model. Okay, so as we look at on the I'll call it the y-axis is business model, and then on the x-axis is looking at technical competencies. And what we have in the, I'll call quadrant 1, which is the lower left, is we have routine, which is the tack-on. Okay, the next generation of the 3 Series for BMW. Okay, the next version of the animation film, or it's like Fast and Furious 9. Okay, it's routine, it's tack-on. Okay, and they do well. A lot of companies make a lot of money doing that. But you may want to look at leveraging an existing business model, which is, basically pay per unit, but now we want to maybe bring new technology competencies. We see this in biotechnology, we see this in tech, we see the jet engines, we see fiber optic cable in terms of where we're bringing new technology, but we're still using, say, per unit purchase payment that is for that technology coming through. Okay, whereas changing the business model really can change up the game. And I think we're all familiar with some examples, and I'll give you one additional example, but requiring a new business model. Open source software, video on demand. We look at Netflix with streaming. Netflix totally disrupted the video business, which was dominated by Blockbuster. And then we look at, in terms of taxi and limos, what we've been able to see with Uber. Okay, so going to businesses that are subscription oriented. Okay, and another good example is we had a company called Omeza that worked with us in the springtime, and they had a product that was we were working on that was for venous leg ulcers. And when we understand that compliance was an issue, we thought, can we give them fixed supply delivered to the doorstep at a fixed subscription rate, and if they needed more, we can give them more. But the thing is to deliver certain outcomes, because what we do is that we improve compliance with getting the wraps, getting the covers, getting the adhesive bandages that are needed for the ulcers that were there, would be able to, by the delivery system, change the nature of a very, very competitive, we're talking about 24 different competitors in a very small marketplace, which was like, I think, $300 million in the U.S. So I thought that was an interesting item, and it was something that our team that was working on this had in their backup slides. But you could take it from just being disruptive to architectural, which really talks about new business model, but also new technological capabilities. We see this in personalized medicine, where we have basically monoclonal antibodies that are used targeted for certain cancer cells. And we're going to see this more and more because we know of the individuality of individual patients, and so the right drug for the right patient. So if we end up having success, you pay full price for that product because you are paying for the outcome. And as a result, we see these contracts called risk share contracts now in play, which are about paying for outcomes. And if you do not achieve those outcomes because you have not given to the right patients, as a result is that you don't have to pay the provider of the drug because of that. So that's something that's going on in healthcare these days, especially in the oncology business. But then you look at other businesses like digital imaging, where we've moved from where we would pay for the unit of film that was developed into a picture, to now we have digital copies that can be shared on Pinterest and on Facebook and various other media that's there, that just totally has changed the nature of how the photographic business is. And to that end is companies like Polaroid and Kodak, Eastman Kodak. I mean, Eastman Kodak was the giant in the 60s and 70s, and now it really has just, the business has passed them by. And even we think about newspapers, if you think about the model that newspapers have had, even though they are trying to get back with digital with internet subscriptions, etc., is their model is dead. And that the internet news with various media services that are online, 24-hour oriented, constantly changing, and the way people are serving up and getting news, and how we're monetizing in terms of that content delivery and that relationship with the customer audience is really become not just a technological change in the business, but also a business model change. So teams, as you think about your clients, you need to not think about just the technology and the customer, but also what type of business model might be there as well. So, not to confuse you further and to think about and get over too creative, but these are things to be able to think as an entrepreneur. It's not to be in the box just thinking that you're tacking on the next iPhone improvement, but that you start thinking beyond the box. You think about how you can be able to leverage the technology in new ways, and maybe within your business model or beyond, and in new business models that are there. So for further reference, just to wrap things up, there are in your reading pack from Harvard Business Review multiple articles by Blank and Christensen, as well as an article from Sloan Management Review by Dong, as well as Kapoor, which gives you the GE experience, and then Gary Pisano's seminal article, which I took that 2x2 from, which really talked about you need an innovation strategy, which I constantly use in many lectures. And I think that it is really a shift in how you need to think if you're going to be innovative. It is not just about the technology, but it's also in your business model. And we've seen a number of different businesses do that and be incredibly successful. And here are some examples of some businesses. And I want to thank you for your attention. And I certainly hope that this is of value. It's been a great quarter working with you all. And hopefully you will take some of these ideas. You will create great products, maybe great businesses. You will be very successful, and you will make us all proud over at Orfala. All right. Anyway, have a great evening, and I will see you in class tomorrow.